One day, McIntyre Jr. comes down the stairs and he pulls his dad aside and he goes, Dad, I'm thinking. Everybody seems to be saying to me that books are great. So I'm thinking about reading one for the first time. McIntyre thinks about it and he goes, Books? You should just listen to a podcast. What do you think?
What do I think?
That's right.
I'm going to dispute your premise.
What?
I'm disputing your premise. There's no way in hell everybody was telling young Macklejack he should read a book.
Okay.
Maybe one guy was telling Macklejack he should read a book, right?
Right.
Because reading a book can be a disaster.
Reading is never a disaster. I love to read.
Well, it's always a disaster. What happens is when you become a reader, you become a thinker. And then once you start thinking, the world depresses you.
Well, that's true. Okay, that's true.
And everybody who listens to our podcast is a thinker, and they probably read. So we are preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
But you have not only read a book, you've written a book.
I have written a book, and I'm so glad you brought that up.
And I'm extremely proud of you because I think everybody should try to write a book.
Yeah.
Because first of all, well, I mean, you wrote the book and I'm talking too much. So tell us, how was writing the book? How was the process?
No, sure. Well, it's so funny that you started off saying what you said about how reading is a disaster, because that's how writing it felt. Because the premise of this book is that every chapter focuses on a topic like identity, suffering, and free will that is hard to digest, particularly as a young person. And so whenever I was writing about identity, I had to think about mine. And when I was writing about suffering, I had to think about how I suffer, and I had to think about free will. And that was so depressing, to be honest with you. And this was, of course, I started writing these chapters when we were locked up in our homes, during the pandemic at the height of it. And so I'm alone in this little house writing about suffering and identity. And that was hard. And so writing was actually a disaster.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. So we have, you know who Jordan Peterson is, yeah?
No, I don't.
So Jordan Peterson is this, he's a thinker and a psychologist from Canada. And extreme liberals and woke people don't like him. And if you Google Jordan Peterson, you'll get a lot of negative things from the woke side.
Yeah, that's ringing a bell, actually.
I don't think he's all that conservative, but he's very pragmatic.
Gotcha.
That bothers people on the far left. And anyway, he is controversial. There's something riveting about the way he talks. Okay. You should read it because he talks about things that are similar to things you talk about in your book.
Right.
And his book is called The 12 Principles for Living or something. Anyway, here comes the point.
Okay.
I got a video in my people skills class of Jordan Peterson explaining that writing is thinking.
That's pretty cool.
And as you know, we think. Yeah. Most people don't think. So you could read a book, I guess, without thinking, but there's no way in hell you can write a book without thinking.
Yeah, well, that's the truth, and it's so funny because I'm thinking back on my process, and I only finished writing it like 2 weeks ago, and I sent it off to a professional editor, and she just returned all the copies back to me. And yeah, there's some serious thinking that goes on. And in fact, part 2 of the book, there's part 1, which is talking about some of those heavier topics that we actually originally first talked about in our podcast. And so what I did was in that chapter about suffering, I referenced episode 12 of our podcast, and I throw in a quote from you, and it's kind of like throws this tennis ball in the air, and then I smack it in the rest of the chapter. And that was kind of my cadence. But in part 2, I tried to pick out ideas that we didn't talk about in the podcast at all in an effort to challenge our common worldviews. And I think you'll find that part of the book more enticing than the first chapter, just because I know you've been talking to young people for so long about those other things, but I think you'd like to hear what I have to say about business students and Boy Scouts and bar mitzvahs and dumpster divers. I think
wow, that's all in there.
It's all in there. I promise you, you'd love it. If not, if you don't even read the first part, I'd love for you to read the second part. Just
of course, I'm going to read it.
Yeah.
I'm always running on the state of exhaustion.
Right.
And I did read the first chapters back when you started.
Yeah, way back when.
And we talked about that. So let's do a teaser like we're on the Colbert Show or something. Tell me about what in the world would you have to say about bar mitzvahs? That's what I want to know.
That's what you want to know.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want to know. I'm impressed you even know what a bar mitzvah is.
Hey, listen, what I have to say about bar mitzvahs, man, just going off the top of my head here. My premise of the chapter is that in America, for people like me, there is no one event that takes us from being boys and moves us into being men. You have that in other cultures, and I reference other cultures. There's a culture that uses a glove that they weave together with, string and brush, and they put bullet ants in there, and the bullet ants sting their hands. And then after they endure that, they're now men, and they're treated as such. They're seen as such. And I argue that that's not really commonplace in America any longer. And I make the exception of, you have the bar mitzvah tradition in the Jewish culture, and that, kind of signifies as a modern event of, hey, you're a man. And I argue that, when I got my driver's license, when I got my high school diploma, my college degree, none of those things served the distinct purpose of a bullet ant glove or a bar mitzvah where it says, Andy is an adult. People will see him as such, treat him as such. He now has these responsibilities and so forth. And there's this huge gap between what a man should be, ought to be, and how it's lived out. And you have a lot of things like toxic masculinity, but I'm sure I'm giving the whole thing away now. We said a teaser, but that's kind of my premise in chapter 10 is, American boys becoming American men.
That's a great point, because America is essentially land of children. We have almost no grown-ups in the country. Right? We all just act like children. We indulge every petty impulse. Right? We don't want to take responsibility for ourselves. And of course, the first thing every child would do if they could is get a freaking dog, which we've all done. Right? Without regard to whether it's a smart decision or not, right? You get a dog and legalize marijuana, you're off and running. It's big, giant children. Whatever I want, and I'm getting it.
That's right. It's so funny, and it's like, that just goes on forever because there's nothing that stops us and says, okay, we're done with boyhood. Now here's manhood. And that's what that looks like in a healthy way too, which is a hard thing to communicate, especially to like guys, as they become men, this is what it looks like in a healthy way. So that's all chapter 10. But I wanted to real quick, because this is a video, of course, share my screen here because we're on Zoom. I wanted to show you the book cover that I got back this week from the artist I hired. Are you seeing my screen here?
It said you started sharing your screen. There it is.
There it is.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's actually called Just Ideas, of course, because it's inspired. And I used the adjective hit. I don't know if it's a hit podcast or not, but it says there on the back cover, inspired by the hit podcast by Andy and Andy. And it's got our orange coloring, and it's got the white rabbit. And it's got what I put on the back was essentially, I was thinking to myself one day, I got to make an elevator pitch for this book. And I thought the elevator pitch should go on the back. So I'm going to read it aloud to you and to our listeners, and you tell me what you think. All right.
Yes.
Okay. So it says, as one of the oldest members of Gen Z, Andy Brophy was among the first of his generation to go through the college experience and the eventual transition to corporate America. Looking back on that pivotal time in life, he realized very few people spoke honestly about the important and confusing affairs of the human experience. This book was written to share ideas about such matters, like identity and suffering, to better characterize the issues we face. Additionally, in an attempt to challenge our common worldviews, Andy shares his unpopular opinions about matters like business students, Boy Scouts, and even dumpster divers. So that's the pitch. And I've been writing it for a year and a half or so. And it comes out December 5th, actually, which I think when this comes out, it'll be maybe 2 weeks away, 3 weeks away, but very soon. And it'll be available only on barnesandnoble.com. That's where it's going to be sold. You can get it at bn.com, barnesandnoble.com, and that's December 5th. So I'm very excited to share that with you, with our audience. It's the culmination of this podcast and the things we talked about. And it's even more so over that. And so I'm super excited about it. And I was just so thrilled I got to share it with you because, you know, you have, of course, been such a huge influence in my life, and you taught me to think. And I think I even put in the acknowledgments, when I acknowledge you, I put, you taught me how to see the silliness in society, and moreover, see how I take part in the silliness of society, which is just great, you know. And if any student gets anything from your class, it's they see how they're silly too, amidst living a silly life. So what do you think?
I think it's great. I think, you know, I'll tell you again, it's very, very impressive. I think everybody should go through the exercise. Everybody listening, of course, should go buy it. You get a hard copy from Barnes and Noble?
So yeah, cool. Paperback on Barnes and Noble. And I think what I'll do is a week later, I'll release an audiobook version, and it won't be like monotone narrator. It'll be me reading it in a voice like the one I've been talking in during this podcast and every other one, just a real casual audiobook. And I was hoping, if you had the time, I know you're super busy, if you wanted to record an audio forward for the book that's exclusive to the audiobook, I think that'd make it a really interesting audiobook. And you don't have to commit to it or not, but just a bug I wanted to put in your ear. Maybe you could record a forward for the book.
I would love to do that.
That'd be awesome. I think people would get a kick out of that.
And I will do that.
That's
no
great.
question about it. So let's run down this road a little bit. Sure. It's funny, 3 times this semester, somebody in class one time, some guy raised his hand and said, have you heard of the 6 characteristics of somebody? I can't remember even who it was. And I hit the PowerPoint, bam, the 6 things were on the next slide. That's awesome. It's amazing how things go together. So just today, I read an email that was sent to me on September 28th, because generally when students, send me long emails.
Real long.
It's going to take me a month to get to it.
Yeah.
In this case, a month and a half.
Sure.
But it's exactly what you're talking about. Listen to what this person was in my class a few years ago. And he said, your insistence of the importance of reading and hearing others' opinions changed the way I view the world and truly made a big positive difference in the trajectory of my life/career.
Wow.
However, true to what you said in class, what I learned in your class made me unhappy and dissatisfied with the world around me.
Get out of here. That's a real email.
Just read it this morning.
Oh my gosh.
Printed it off to talk about on our podcast. Then you jump on and say, we're talking about this. And I was all ready for it.
That is insane. That's so funny.
And there's some other parts that are probably worth reading. But what he basically goes on to say is, he talks about how you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
So true.
So we decided to get better people. Right?
There's no way this is real.
What's that?
This is I'm saying there's no way this is real. This is like probably the first time in your career where someone says exactly what you're trying to get through to them.
And then he said, then I got a job that I thought was awesome. Pay was decent, clear career path, seemed easy to succeed in the organization. But 6 months into working there, I realized my coworkers and my superiors were mostly morons. And by staying there, I would soon become one of them.
Oh my gosh.
So I left to go back to grad school. And guess what? More morons.
More morons.
So he said, well, I know I clearly evaluate others on a different scale from myself. I can't help notice that other people aren't trying to get better.
Wow.
And this semester, I did this big thing on showing appreciation and told people they should send a thank you note to their parents for, the sacrifice they make for them to go to college.
Yeah.
And we think about 1 out of 100 did it.
Sure.
And I think one out of 100 is really trying hard. 2 out of 100 are trying. 5 out of 100 are putting some effort to, and 95% are jellyfish floating on the sea of life. They're a jellyfish. Wherever the current takes them, that's where they go.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So he said they aren't trying to advance the organization or do meaningful work. They're just collecting the check so they could afford to eat at Olive Garden every Friday.
Come on. You wrote this email.
I think the question that I want to ask is, are all workplaces full of morons?
Wow.
And what advice can you give me, to avoid that? And then this goes to what you really said. He says at the end, he goes, I'm also a moron, but I'm trying not to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's and it's the same with me, right? That you fight with this podcast. If you want to run the theme all the way back from the first podcast to this one, right? We're always talking about trying not to be human. Humans try to avoid suffering. You said we should suffer. Humans don't want to grow up. In your book, we said we should grow up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's the battle of not being humans.
That's the worst, though. That's the hardest battle we fight.
So think about this. Why do people vote for Donald Trump?
Ooh, because he's human.
Well, he is human.
Yeah, right.
He is a big ball of humanity.
Yeah.
And the progressives, since the dawn of man, right? Since somebody said we shouldn't have slavery, which of course is in the Bible, because if you didn't think about it and you could, why wouldn't you? Right? But as soon as you start thinking about it, you're like, well, yeah, this probably isn't fair.
Right.
So the progressive influences have always consistently shown a mirror to being human.
Yeah, the worst.
and then tried to drag us into not being human.
Right.
So you have, I think he's a senator, but that Josh Hawley guy.
No.
He's complaining about, the toxic masculinity is basically males being the male animal, right? And we're gonna put the kibosh on this.
Yes.
Right. As in many aspects we should.
Right.
Without delving into that now, right? But the argument is that the progressives are pulling towards not being human.
Yes.
Right? And we're nicer to each other, and we don't have war, and we think of other people, all the unnatural things, for humans. Right. And so what Donald Trump is he is the resistance of advancing.
Yeah. Hold off on it.
And people get scared, right? And it's uncomfortable. It's not wired into us. Mm-hmm. And people rebel against getting pulled away from all the human instincts and the humanity. And he is 100% human, and they don't care what he says, how anti-Christian he is, how obnoxious he is, how crooked he is. That ball of humanity will stop us from being pulled away from my human comfort zone. And that's why so many people who've never read a book will fall on the grenade for Donald Trump.
It's so interesting.
They want to be human.
No, that's true. It's so funny. Sometimes just for fun on my Instagram, they have like the little short videos feature called Reels. And I put little sound bites of us on there. And I was scrolling through it because it makes me smile listening to you say all sorts of crazy stuff. And it just reminded me of this, as you were saying in an episode previous about how Donald Trump loves the uneducated and how we were riffing off that. And he says, I love the uneducated. And then we go, that's me.
Yeah. And then there's, I think the Republican Party is, to a great extent, a shill for the super wealthy.
Yep.
And some of the people vote for Trump because they don't want to pay taxes.
Yeah.
But the masses, just don't want to let go of their humanity.
Yeah. And this is actually like a pretty big philosophical debate that we maybe don't even want to get into right now. But it's like, if something's natural, does that make it good? Like, if I'm being natural, I'm being me, then great. But there's a counter argument to that where it's like, no, when you're your most you and you're most natural, you don't want that. Like, that's not inherently good.
Well, I didn't want to get into the details of it today, but the nature of having civilization, right, is to tamp down our human tendencies.
Yeah, yeah, which can be totally erratic and illogical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Male, masculinity is essentially like a German shepherd. You want to walk into people's house and just jump on their leg.
And we love our dogs.
Civilization dictates that we can't do that. And I think everyone would agree, just about everybody would agree, except possibly Donald Trump, that and of course, Donald Trump has done this time and time and time again. He walks into the room and jumps on their leg. So he is a big ball of humanity, and that's something. So reading, and thinking counterbalances that. And I guess the long game is everybody thinks it does get better, and sometimes thinkers can drag things forward.
Maybe that's our little sliver of hope from all this pessimism, I suppose. But I just want to real quick before we end it, because I think this is probably a more natural ending spot than not, is that in the book I write, it's just 160 pages. It turns out it's very hard to write a book. So it's a brief read. Like, it's not going to take you weeks and weeks to get through it. But I write about identity. I write about community, suffering, free will, control, pride, and purpose. That's part one. And then I already mentioned part two. That's business students, dumpster divers, bar mitzvahs, Boy Scouts. And those are all new ideas intended to challenge your worldview. I think, college age people would love it because I think it'd speak to them. But I think also people in your generation would love it because it'll give you a clue as to what are these young people thinking? That's the big mystery for you old people, is why do young people do the things they do or think the things they think? And this may give you a little bit of insight. So you'd have to check it out. It comes out December 5th. barnesandnoble.com is where it'll be available. And yeah, I think it's a good read. Today I got to go through the edits that gal sent me and clean it up because my rough drafts were just that, rough. So unless you have anything closing comments you want to make, I think that'd be a good spot to wrap it up on reading and thinking and all that.
Well, I'm going to buy a bunch of them on December 5th and send them out as Christmas gifts, because I love Christmas. So this is going to solve one of my problems. I'm going to send people your book for Christmas. So I'm excited, and I would end by saying it's very, very impressive, and I hope you feel good about yourself, because it is. You climbed a mountain, and you will have learned a lot and become a better person for doing it, however it goes.
Well, I do appreciate that. And I think you'll like it too, because I put some of your quotes in there and some funny, good things you said. So I think you'll like to see that nod to your influence as well. But I appreciate all the kind words.
All right. Well, I wish you the best with it.
All right. Well, for Just Ideas, my name's Andy, and that was Andy.